A very good morning to you on this, the 9th day of May. It's a friendly Friday and end of a work week. And if you've joined us, you have joined us on the First Connection. I'm Terry Martin and I'm stationed up here in Johannesburg for a while. And we are working our way through the storyline of the book of Philippians. It's a letter written to Philippi, the believers at Philippi, and it's an encouragement for the assembly to be mindful, because mindfulness matters. The moment you give focused and focal attention to something, the hierarchy of your values will shift and they have to be rearranged, because now you are focusing. And that's why paying attention is a moral act. All of that ties into mindfulness. We don't leave our brains at the door when we become part of the family of God. We are to be engaging our mental faculties to the hilt. I've often joked about the fact that many believers will go to the grave with brand new machines, unused, untapped, because the last thing that they want to do is to think. Because thinking, men and women, is hard work. It takes time, it takes energy. I would equal it to plowing a field. You may not think so, because you may not be given to that. But when we look at the book of Philippians, the 4 chapters, the 104 verses, we notice that in the first chapter of the story, mindfulness inspires connection, because we are part of a tribal grouping. There's tribal relationality. The more mindful we are, the deeper our relationality goes, and the more we can function well. Mindfulness inspires connections and it ignites cognition, thinking. What kind of thinking? Cruciform thinking. It's not a new word. It comes from the word crucify, cruciformity. The shape of my thinking is modal cruciformity. It is patterned after the finished work of Christ. What is that about? It's about his life, his death, and his resurrection. It's about order, disorder, and reorder. And that fractal you will find all over God's creation. He has a way of bringing order out of chaos. He has a way of bringing life out of death. Incidentally, that's what he majors on doing. Then in chapter 3, fatal ideologies. Mindfulness makes us aware of how fatal ideologies are, idolatries of ideas, and not to be involved in that, because that doesn't make for good participation in the assembly. I'm ideologically possessed by an ism, and ISM, and that is what drives my thinking. When you think politically, we've got the center, and you've got those left of center and those right of center and everything else in between. Well, the danger for us is as the people of God, we tend to have the same kind of thinking. And our ideologies have a way of getting us to swerve according to our left hemispheres, the left hemisphere of our brain. And ideology is fatal to creative, novel, and innovative thinking. And of all people on the planet, believers need to be the most creative, novel, and innovative. But I can hear you sighing and saying, oh, no, that can't be, because they seem to be some of the most boring people on the planet. Now, after that word of encouragement, let's go to the 4th chapter. Mindfulness invites compensation. There are great payoffs, beneficial utility that accrues to us when we practice being mindful, not emptying our heads of what the little that's left there and thinking about nothing. It's about beholding Him and thinking about Him and who He is and contemplating Christ and occupying myself with Him. And amazing things start to happen inside my life. So this morning we are going to look at, in the time that we have left, we are in no rush here. Jesus is not in a panic over me when my time is running out. I need to be a good steward of my time. And so we're going to look at verse 3 to verse 11. We won't get through all the verses of the story, but you must understand, first of all, that our cognitive ability is deeply nested and enmeshed inside of stories, because that's the way our minds work. Our heads work like that. They work according to stories. Because what does a story do? A story gives context. Story is very different than a propositional statement, a semantically disambiguated sentence that has been crafted to communicate an idea. Let me give you a short one. God is love. That's a propositional statement. But that's not we can't end there. We can't just say, well, we've got black ink on white paper, so we've got that proposition down. We need to shift from propositional understanding to dispositional understanding. What does God desire for me to be? Not the propositions I adopt. Propositions are the currency of dispositional knowing. When I exercise my soul in the processes of thinking and doing and living, I'm given to process, I'm given to perspectives, and I'm given to participation. Listen, believer, what I'm talking about here is nothing new. It has been in the area of the cognitive sciences for a very, very long time. And incidentally, it's in the scriptures. Let me just track for you very quickly through chapter 1. How the mind comes in verse 3. I thank my God, Paul says, on every remembrance. How do you remember things? Well, you have chemical pathways in your brain. Memory is chemical machinery. I have a better way of saying that. You remember. Paul says, every time I remember you, I'm praying for you. Verse 6, I am confident of this very thing. Where does persuasion come from? This word confidence is the word peitho, which means I persuade or I am persuaded. It happens in the sphere of the mind, of the brain, and of thinking. Verse 7 goes on to say, even as it is meet or correct for me to think this about you all because I have you in my heart. There's the word think. So we have remember, be persuaded, think. Now it goes on, it gets worse. Verse 9. And this I pray that your love may abound yet more and more in, here's that word, knowledge. Getting to know stuff. But it's to get to know stuff experientially versus just buying propositions. I believe that God is a Trinitarian being. It's a propositional statement. How about experiencing and encountering this triplication in the horrors that life throws me into? Well, it doesn't stop with knowledge. It says that your love may abound in knowledge and in all judgment. Again, all thinking kinds of words that have to do with discerning, in all judgment. If you think that ends, it doesn't. Verse 12, that you would understand. Verse 14, I am waxing confident. Many of the brothers around me are waxing confident. That has to do with becoming persuaded. That what's happening to me is real and God is real. Verse 16, or do you suppose to add affliction to my bonds? There's the word suppose. It is a thinking kind of word. It doesn't stop. It becomes monumental. Verse 17, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. I want you to know that. Verse 19, I know. And then that funny word in verse 22 in the King James Version. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose, I what not. A very English word. We say all this and what not. What not? The things that I don't even know about. What I shall choose, I don't know. It's what not. So it's a very good expression. It appears in the KJV, not in the ESV though. Translated differently. Then verse 25, I have confidence. Verse 25, I know. Here's the killer, verse 27, at the end of the chapter. We hold fast with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. One mind. What is the mind all about? The mind has to do with the betweenness. What happens when I am involved in thoughts and thinking? The betweenness between ideas, one idea and another idea. One person's head to another person's head. We are striving with one-mindedness together for the faith of the gospel. So if you thought this was just dealing with Mickey Mouse, mindfulness inspires connections because it starts in the mind. And I have lost count of how many descriptors I just mentioned in chapter 1. So you cannot put your brain in a parking meter. Beloved, don't commit that atrocity of putting your mind into neutral and say, Lord, teach me. You're fully engaged in remembering, being persuaded, thinking, knowing, judging, discerning, understanding, supposing, knowing versus not knowing. If knowledge is a drop, then ignorance is an ocean. Don't forget that. You think you know. How ignorant of you. There's a whole world of stuff that you and I don't know. How big is God? How big and wide is vast domain? To begin to tell, these lips can only, they stutter. To begin to tell, these lips can only try. And so, whether you're 50, 60, 70, or 80, or into your 90s, your mental faculties are with you. They're there for a reason. And use them as far as you can and develop your mental acumen until the day you drop. Because God He desires sharp pencils. Pencils who can think their way out of a brown paper bag. Out of all people, somehow the saints seem to fail on that one at every count. I say, oh, very discouraging words for a Friday morning. Wow. Mindfulness is about putting a tiger into your mental tank. And if you thought you were going to get running through of verses and saying amen at the end, I've just changed gears on the spot because I've given you a whole list of thought words, of thinking words, because mindfulness has to do with actively engaging in making moral decisions, rearranging my values furniture in my head, because I'm attending to something very carefully and I'm watching it and I'm looking at it. Remember, it ain't over till God says it's over. And so we're sitting at the 15-minute mark and say, I'm going to draw to a close and leave tracking through 11, verse 3 to verse 11 for the next episode, where we'll go a little more deeply into this idea of Mindfulness, it's not only about cordiality in the context of community, but it's also about continuity in the life of the community. And it's about ultimate care, caring ultimacy in the context of the assembly and what that looks like. So maybe you just feel you have a good breather now to think a bit, because I've rattled off a whole grocery list here of thinking words, thought words. Well, thought bombs are like that. They explode your thinking and they get you to think in many different ways and novel ways, because somebody who's not ideologically locked has a hard time. Somebody who is ideologically locked has a hard time dealing with thought bombs. They just don't deal with it because it's far too uncomfortable. It blows their circuitry. It blows their system. That's why God hasn't called us to adopt systems in the believing community. He's called us to embark on a journey of discovery of truth, the discovery of Him who is the truth, the true and living way. How about that as an alternative to a system that you have deeply drunk into or imbibed in your Christian and spiritual worldview? Well, let me go. Let me let you go for 2 more days and have a break. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the weekend. And we will be back, as the Lord permits, on Monday morning for the next down payment of the next episode. Have a good day. Goodbye for now.